Our lesson for today is all about logical functions in Excel. There are three logical functions in Excel: if, and, or. These are the common logical functions that we're going to study today. If function. If function, when logical test is true, will return value if true. Otherwise, it will return false if the value is false. The syntax of if function is if, open parenthesis, logical under test, comma, the value if true, comma, the value if false. Syntax refers to the layout and order of the function and its argument. So in writing if functions or any other functions in Excel, we are going to follow the given syntax for a specific function. Now I am going to show you the correct steps or process in using F logical function in Excel. Remember or recall that if function, when logical test is true, returns value if true. Otherwise, it will return value if false. Now, the first step to add if function is to click the cell in which you want to enter an if function. Now, in our example, I'm going to select cell E3. Column E, and row number 3. So click E3 or any other cell that you want to. Then after clicking the cell, click the formula tab, and then click logical. There is a drop down arrow. You're going to click that drop down arrow, and then we will select if. After selecting if, we will type a conditional statement that evaluates to true or false. Now, the logical test that I'm going to use is to test whether the grades of the student is passed or failed. So, logical test. What we're going to do is logical test value of C3 is greater than or equal to 75. If the logical test is true, we will type now the value if it will equal to true. So we'll type passed. Otherwise, it will display failed. So we're going to test now whether the value grade under C3 is greater than or equal to 75. This will be our logical test. After that, we will click OK. So we will evaluate now if our result is correct. Now, our logical test is if value of C3 is greater than or equal to 75, now the value of C3 is 85, which is greater than 75. So it will result passed. So our test or our logical function displays passed. So if you want to copy the same formula applied on cell E3, we will use now the fill handle. We will click, hold, and drag. So it will test now whether the grades of the student in English subject is passed or failed. Now we will try to change the grade of April C10 in English subject to 71. We will try if it will display failed. So it will display failed. So this is the process if you are going to add or use if function. And function returns true if all its arguments are true, and if false, if one or more arguments are false. This time, I'm going to show you the process or the correct step in using AND logical function. Now, the first step in adding logical function AND is we're going to click the cell in which you want to enter an AND function. Now I'm going to select E3. Then after, click the Formula tab, Formula, then click Logical, the drop-down arrow, and then we will click AND. Then, we will type a conditional statement that evaluates to true or false. In our example, we will evaluate if the value of C3 and D3 is greater than 75. Now, what we're going to do is we will click this one. We will add a separator, comma, this one. Then we will use the comparison or logical operator greater than 75. Enter. So, the answer is true. Now, we will manually evaluate whether the display or the answer of AND function is true. Our logical task is C3, which is 85, and D3, which is 90, is greater than 75. Now, it will return true. Remember that AND function returns true if all arguments are true. Returns false if any argument is false. Now, we will try to change the value of cell D3 to 71, whether it will display false. So it will display false since our logical test is C3, which is 85, and D3, which is 71, is greater than 75. Now we have one true, which is C3, 85, and D3 is not greater than 75. So we have one false. So the answer is false. Or function will return true if any argument is true, returns false if all arguments are false. The syntax of OR function is OR logical 1, comma, logical 2, and so on. Don't forget to add first equal sign before typing the correct syntax of any other functions in Excel, because in Excel, it is mandatory to use equal sign, meaning the equivalent or the cell content will be equal to the value of the function or the formula entered on a specific cell. Now, I'm going to show the correct steps in using OR function or logical function in Excel. Now, the first step to use OR logical function is we are going to select again the cell where we want to enter the formula. Then, after that, click Formulas tab. Then, after Formulas tab, click the drop-down arrow under Logical, and then we will click OR. The function argument dialog box will open. This is that answers the following question. The first question is, or the logical test that we're going to use is to test whether cell C3, which is 85, and cell D3, which is 71, is less than 75. So we will click C3, comma, D3. Then we will use the logical operator less than 75. Then enter. So we will evaluate now manually our logical test. Remember that our logical function will display or will return true if any argument is true. Meaning, if there is one true and there are one or more false, it will still display true. But if the OR argument returns false, it will return false, meaning if true, all arguments are true, it will return true. If all arguments returns false, it will return false. If one argument is true and one or more argument will equal to false, still it will return true value. Now we will manually evaluate our logical test. Our logical test is C3, which is 85, and D3, which is 71, less than the value of 75. Now we will evaluate, is 85 less than 75? False. Is 71 less than 75? True. Again, we have two values. We have false and we have true. And since we're using OR logical function, since we have one true and one false, automatically it will display true. Now, we will change the value of C3 to 60. We will try to figure out if it will still return true or it will return false. The value is true. Since our argument C3 less than 75 and D3 is less than 75. So that's all for today's lesson. I hope you've learned something about logical functions, if and or. God bless and stay safe.